shall move to questions without notice, and I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. 2 years ago, the Prime Minister promised Australian families cheaper mortgages and that life would be easier. Yet the Albanese government has increased spending by $315 billion, fuelling Labor's homegrown inflation crisis. The RBA Governor has warned if, and I quote, "we're not getting inflation down, then we won't hesitate to move and raise interest rates again." What assurance can the Prime Minister give Australian families that there won't be a 13th rate rise under Labor's watch?
Order. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy is warned. Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the member for his question, and it goes to the comments of the Reserve Bank Governor and fiscal policy in the budget, a budget that has been handed down by the Treasurer not once but twice. That's in the black, not mugs, just surpluses, Labor surpluses, which arose out of what we had, which was Liberal deficits, and turning a $78 billion deficit into a $22 billion surplus, and then following it up with another surplus at the same time as inflation is almost half what it was when we inherited it. They always miss out the fact that interest rates started rising on their watch after they handed down the highest inflation quarter. The highest inflation quarter was March 2022. March 2022 of 2.1%. And how did they respond to that? In their March budget handed down by the former member for Kooyong, it was a cash splash, Mr Speaker, a cash splash. And that stands in stark contrast, to what we have done. And that's why
Order. The Treasurer will cease ejecting. We're in question one. There's far too much noise. The Leader of the Opposition was heard in silence, and everyone knows the respect that should be shown to when the Minister or Prime Minister is responding. So he has the call and is going to be heard in silence for the remainder of the answer.
And that is why the Reserve Bank Governor, when asked by a Liberal senator at the budget estimates, had this to say about international experience. It is a very similar experience. And she went on to say, fiscal policy has been running a surplus for the past couple of years, so I would say that's been helping the inflation situation, if anything. The Reserve Bank Governor. Now, if it's a choice between the Reserve Bank Governor and the Shadow Treasurer who got rolled again today on divestment, then I'll pick the Reserve Bank Governor.
Order. Order. The Leader of the Nationals, when the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Order. We'll hear from the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. What action is the Albanese Labor government taking to make it easier for Australians to see a doctor for free? Why is the government determined to lift Medicare bulk billing rates after a decade of cuts and neglect?
Order. The member for Fisher is warned. Just as I warned the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, interjecting is highly disorderly when the question is being asked. The Minister for Health and Aged Care has the call.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Lyons for that question, because he is such a strong advocate for better health care in Tasmania, for more bulk billing, for cheaper medicines, for better urgent care services, because he knows that Tasmania was hit so hard by that decade of cuts and neglect to Medicare. It's especially hard to find a doctor in Tasmania, and bulk billing rates there have been lower than any other state for quite some time. I'm happy to say a few weeks ago, Mr Speaker, the member for Lyons and I announced a 5th Medicare urgent care clinic for Tasmania to be based around Bridgewater in his electorate. Like the other clinics, It's going to be open 7 days a week, extended hours, available for walk-in patients, and importantly, Mr Speaker, it will be fully bulk billed. And I've said I want this clinic up and running by the end of the year because I know what a difference it will make to the people of Bridgewater, but also to surrounding communities like Brighton and the northern suburbs of Hobart. But, Mr Speaker, the member for Lyons has also pushed us hard on better bulk billing. Before the last election, he was one of a number of Labor MPs who were reporting a growing sense of alarm in the community about falling rates of bulk billing for GP visits. And the reason for that fall, Mr Speaker, was crystal clear. A deliberate program by the Liberals to undermine bulk billing, because we remember, Mr Speaker, the father of the modern Liberal Party, of course, called bulk billing an absolute rort. And the Leader of the Opposition, when he was Health Minister, of course, tried to abolish bulk billing altogether, because he said there were, in his words, too many free Medicare services, Mr Speaker. Well, that's not our approach. Last year, in November, we tripled the bulk billing incentive, Mr Speaker, after a call to do that by the College of General Practitioners. They called that a game changer, Mr Speaker, and I'm pleased to report to the member for Lyons, since doing that, the bulk billing rate for GP visits in Tasmania has risen by more than 8%, Mr Speaker, more than 8%. And I've seen increases in every single state and territory since November. In the month of May alone, Mr Speaker, there were more than 900,000 additional free visits to the doctor. 900,000 in just 1 month, Mr Speaker. This government, Mr Speaker, is doing everything we possibly can to help Australians with the cost of living. Tax cuts for every taxpayer, energy bill relief for every household, Mr Speaker. And we know that more free visits to the doctor, cheaper medicines, they're not just good for the hip pocket, as good as that is, they're also good for your health, Mr Speaker. And at the end of the day, that is how you deliver real cost of living relief, not by pushing up power prices through nuclear reactors.
The call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Last night, Senator Fatima Payman released a statement claiming Labor members were, quote, attempting to intimidate her into resigning from the Senate. On the 7th of November 2022, the Prime Minister said in this place, quote, everyone has the right to a safe and respectful workplace. Prime Minister, what steps have been taken to investigate these claims of intimidation in Senator Payman's workplace?
The call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. They have very short memories over there. Last week, the Leader of the Opposition was calling for Labor to take action against Senator Payman, and was using the full suite of measures, Mr Speaker, the full suite of insults and his usual plan to show how macho he is. All of that language was all there. You had to muscle up, Mr Speaker, was his view.
Order. Member for Barker is warned.
The fact is that earlier today, the caucus unanimously adopted a position. Senator Payman is more than welcome back to participate in the team if she agrees that she's part of the team. I had a very civil and constructive discussion with Senator Payman on Sunday. I invited her to the Lodge, and I had a very civil and constructive discussion with her last week as well.
Give the call to the member for Dunkley.
My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government easing cost of living pressures and ensuring Australians earn more and keep more of what they earn? What obstacles were overcome?
A call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Dunkley for her question. The member for Dunkley has only been here for a relatively short amount of time, and already she's helped ensure that there will be a tax cut for every taxpayer from this week. She's helped ensure energy bill relief for every household in Australia. helped ensure that people on awards will get a pay cut, pay rise. Millions of Australians will get a pay rise from this week, Mr Speaker, and cheaper medicines and an extra couple of weeks of paid parental leave as well, Mr Speaker. And I well recall in the member for Dunkley's campaign going and speaking with the early childhood educators of her local community to tell them that every single one of them will be getting a tax cut because of this Prime Minister and this Labor government, Mr Speaker. And not just the early educators, but every single taxpayer in this country. $36 on average, $63 a week for the average household with kids, Mr Speaker. $26 a week for healthcare workers, $30 a week for teachers, $37 a week for truckies, $36 a week for builders, $51 a week for sparkies, $72 a week for miners, Mr Speaker. These are the tax cuts that come in this week because of this Prime Minister and this Labor government, Mr Speaker. Every single taxpayer in every single industry in this country gets a tax cut this week, Mr Speaker. 79,000 people in the Shadow Treasurer's electorate get a tax cut, averaging $30 a week. 79,000 in the Leader of the Opposition's electorate get on average $31 a week, Mr Speaker. These tax cuts are because of this government and despite that opposition, Mr Speaker, and that's because we know. When they're asked about these tax cuts, they say, of course, they'll roll them back. The Leader of the Opposition wanted an election over these tax cuts when we made them fairer earlier in the year, Mr Speaker. But it doesn't end there. It doesn't end there, Mr Speaker. I think the House should know and the community should know that when the Shadow Treasurer went on radio this morning on 2CC, as I understand it, he was asked about the cost of living relief that rolls out this week. And he dismissed it as handouts, Mr Speaker. He thinks that people working more, earning more and keeping more of what they earn is a handout, Mr Speaker. And doesn't that speak volumes about the Shadow Treasurer and his colleagues, Mr Speaker? He said they were handouts and he said that they would ultimately make it worse. And so he should tell every Australian, getting a tax cut this week, getting energy bill relief, getting cheaper medicines, getting a pay rise, getting another couple of extra weeks of paid parental leave. He should tell them that he thinks it's a handout which will make it worse, Mr Speaker. He has made it clear today, that those opposite do not support cost of living relief for people doing it tough. We do, and we're delivering it.
Order. The member for Groom has interjected 9 times in 2 answers. He's had a good run. He'll now leave the chamber under 94A. There's far too much noise, and if people continually interject day after day after day, then with no other choice they won't be here. I assume everyone wants to stay. Give the call to the honourable member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration. Minister, people within my electorate who have family in Gaza have been advised the quickest way to get them out is to apply for a visitor visa. Yet, according to Senate estimates, 4,614 people applying for this visa from this area have been refused since October 7th, including my constituents' family members. Minister, given our country's actions when it came to other recent conflicts, including the wars in Ukraine and Afghanistan, why hasn't our government not established a clear pathway for people to bring their families from Gaza to safety here in Australia?
Give the call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thanks, Speaker, and I thank the member for North Sydney for her question and for her advocacy on this issue with my office and more broadly in the community. The images every day out of Gaza affect all of us in this place and indeed in the other place, and responding to that is a key focus of the Australian government. And with that in mind, I have been consistently engaging with representative bodies of the Palestinian community on this issue and indeed on other related issues. I can advise the member and indeed advise the House that I am continuing to do so. Now, I can also say that all people who have arrived in Australia from the occupied Palestinian territories are presently able to access a bridging visa E, which will grant them work rights and indeed access to Medicare. The same offer currently applies to arrivals from the Ukraine. This is an offer that has been directly communicated to those Palestinian bodies and indeed to many Palestinians as well as to those legal services that are engaged in supporting many in that community and indeed in other refugee and like refugee communities. Of course, it is up for all individuals to determine a visa pathway that is appropriate for their circumstances. And I should say that, of course, all people who apply for a visa of whatever type have to meet the requirements of the Migration Act. And also, as the member would appreciate, as all members would appreciate, everyone seeking to obtain a visa to come to Australia knows that that application needs to be considered on its individual merit. Now, the issue of visas is very important and the supports that go with them, but so too is recognising the impact this conflict has more broadly on communities right across Australia. And I'm very proud of the efforts across the government led by the Prime Minister to support affected communities, whether it's supports delivered by my friend the Minister for Education in school settings, recognising the particular impact of young people, the work done in the health and mental health space, work across a whole range of initiatives.
The Minister will pause. I'm just going to call the member for North Sydney on a point of order.
With respect, Mr Speaker, and to the Minister, it's on relevance because the question was specifically related to, given the case of other wars, like war in Ukraine and war in Afghanistan, where there were specific pathways established for humanitarian visas. That's not been the case when it comes to Palestine. Why is the government not doing that?
The question was around, and why has the government established a clear way for people to bring out family members? So the member is raising a point of order, but the Minister is being very directly relevant in talking about the subject topic. He's not deviating away from the subject matter, but he has remaining 48 seconds to conclude his answer, and he makes sure he is being directly relevant.
Thanks very much, Speaker. And for the benefit of the member for North Sydney and all members, at the start of my answer I said we are continuing to engage with community members on this issue. I also was going through the range of supports the government is putting in place and will continue to put in place to recognise the challenge to social cohesion that is presented by the impacts of this conflict on communities right across the Australian community. The visa issue is obviously very important to the member and many other members, so too the impacts, whether it's on mental health or other impacts on individuals in the Australian community, citizens as well as people who arrive here on visas. All of these things are important to me. All of these things are a focus for the Albanese government.
The call, General Member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. What cost of living relief is the Albanese Labor government delivering, and what plans to push prices up has the government rejected?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Holt for her question, and I thank the member for hosting me at JD Propagation there in Pearcedale, a nursery in which 14 million seedlings are done every year. We're right there. About the same number as the Australians who'll get tax cuts. Got tax cuts on Monday, Mr Speaker. Just per chance. Just per chance. And the workers who we met there at that nursery are some of the 83,000 taxpayers who got a tax cut this week in Holt. 83,000 in just one electorate. In addition to that, of course, many of those workers that we discussed with will get a pay rise in their next pay packet, because we want Australians to earn more and to keep more of what they earn. In addition to that, every single household will receive $300 in power bill relief. The freezing of the cost of PBS medicines will make a difference as well. In addition, for some, certainly not all, of the constituents of Holt, some will benefit from the 2 weeks extra paid parental leave that will make a difference for families there. All of these measures designed to help people under pressure and take pressure off inflation. Now, what we know is that real wages have actually grown more in the last year than grew under the entire length in which they were in office over there. More in 1 year under us than 10 years under them. And that is the common thread of what we've been doing, providing that assistance while taking pressure off inflation, cheaper childcare, cheaper medicine,
Deputy Leader of the
fee-free
Opposition.
TAFE, all of those measures. The other thing that they have in common, all of these cost of living measures, is that they were opposed by those opposite. Those opposite. Not only did those opposite barrack for the worst outcomes for Australia, they vote for it. We want to see growth up, productivity up and wages up. They're only interested in cutting wages and talking the country down. We want to create jobs in manufacturing, powered by cheaper, cleaner energy. They want to wreck investment and then charge taxpayers for the most expensive form of new energy that's available with their nuclear reactionary plan. We're building more homes and making super stronger. They want to wreck super by making people raid their super. We are getting bulk billing back in business. The Leader of the Opposition wants a second crack at destroying Medicare after the attempts that were there in the 2014 budget.
Prime Minister's time is completed. Order. The House comes to order. We'll hear from the member for Hume.
My question is to the Prime Minister. In a new survey, Finder reports 13% of mortgage holders have extended their home loan in the last year in order to lower their repayments. Finder home loans expert Richard Whitten says the average Australian household has much less disposable income compared to a few years ago. Prime Minister, after 3 failed budgets, why are Australian families paying the price for Labor's economic incompetence?
The call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I didn't think he'd get a question today after he got rolled again on divestiture powers in the supermarket sector, but I welcome the question from the Shadow Treasurer. The question's about mortgage stress. Obviously, we understand that after rates began rising on their watch, that has put additional pressure on Australians with a mortgage. I think that's self-evident. And because of that, this is one of the reasons, the fact that people are under pressure, one of the reasons why we're rolling out substantial, meaningful but responsible cost of living relief this week. And if the Shadow Treasurer really cared about the pressures that people are under in communities right around Australia, instead of opposing our cost of living relief, as he did on the radio this morning, he would support it, and he would support it enthusiastically. Now, if the Shadow Treasurer really understands the mortgage stress that people are under, he would enthusiastically welcome the fact that every single taxpayer is getting a tax cut this week. He would enthusiastically welcome the fact that every household is getting energy bill relief this week. He would enthusiastically welcome the fact that we're giving extra help to parents, we're making medicines cheaper, and that millions of Australians on award wages will be getting a pay rise this week with our full-throated support, Mr Speaker. And so these questions from the Shadow Treasurer would have much more credibility, Mr Speaker, if he came out and said that he supported our cost of living relief. Instead, just this morning, when he was asked about this cost of living relief on radio on 2CC, he dismissed it as a handout and he said it would make it worse. Well, that would be news to people who are hanging out for these tax cuts. That would be news to these people who need and deserve a bit of help with their energy bills. That would be news to new parents who need a bit of extra help via the extension to paid parental leave. That would be news to people who pay a lot for medicines but because of us will be paying a little bit less. That will be news to people who need and deserve higher wages, particularly people on lower wages and people on award wages, Mr Speaker. So we understand the pressures that people are under. More than that, we are responding to them, we are acting on them, and we would expect that any coalition, any opposition who truly cared about cost of living pressures would support them, not oppose them, as the Shadow Treasurer said this morning.
Give the call to the honourable member for Wills.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. What energy bill relief is the Albanese Labor government delivering to help households and small businesses with the cost of living? How is this different from other approaches?
The call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for his question and for his leadership in this House? And through you, Mr Speaker, can I just give a shout-out to his very hard-working electorate staff in his electorate office in Coburg, who do great things for the people of Wills in not always easy circumstances. Now, Mr Speaker, the honourable member asked me about cost of living relief, and I'm very pleased to tell him that as of yesterday, with the delivery of the Albanese government's energy bill relief and the reductions in energy prices in the default market offer and the Victorian market offer, the average energy price for a household in Victoria is down 23%. And, Mr Speaker, for small businesses, they are down 15.5%. They don't like it. They don't like the news, Mr Speaker. It doesn't change the news when energy prices are coming down. And this is in addition, Mr Speaker, for the member for Wills, for the 78,000 taxpayers in his electorate who are getting a tax cut on average of $31 a week in his electorate. So that is what real cost of living relief looks like. And people who are doing it tough deserve a government with a detailed plan to deliver cost of relief now. Not some fantasy plan in decades' time which will backfire and put prices up, but real cost of living relief now. And also medium-term plans. And of course our medium-term plan is the Capacity Investment Scheme, which underpins new renewable energy in our country. And, Mr Speaker—
Order. The member for Hume.
Renewable energy is very different to nuclear energy, because I'm asked about the differences, because renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy and nuclear is the most expensive form of energy, and they don't go too well together. And we saw, Mr Speaker, that impact analysis from the Independent Office of Impact Assessments about our Capacity Investment Scheme, which said consumers are expected to face lower retail electricity prices on average and a reduction in reliability risks. And we've also seen today the chair of the Western Australian Economic Regulation Authority say carving out space in the power system for nuclear to operate around the clock would require putting on hold large-scale renewable generation. And that is the fact, Mr Speaker, and members opposite actually, when they're saying the quiet bit out loud, acknowledge it. The Leader of the National Party said he wants a cap on renewable energy in Australia. And I give credit to the Leader of the National Party. He's calling the shots over there at the moment. He's writing their economic policy. I give credit where it's due. The Leader of the National Party is running the show. The problem is when the Leader of the National Party is running the show when it comes to economics or energy, that's real bad news for the Australian people. But it's great news for the Leader of the National Party, and he should get credit for it, because he is actually determining the policy which sees nuclear come in and renewables go out. We've seen the member for Hinkler to say we should have less renewables and we should curtail renewables. The fact of the matter is, Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition wants a blank cheque for a bad deal, but it's the Australian people who would pay the price for that bad deal by bringing in more expensive energy.
The call to the honourable member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Last night, young mum Emma Robertson from the Gold Coast told A Current Affair that her family is at breaking point. She said, quote, "The tax cuts come in, but do pretty much nothing at all." She continued, quote, "It's horrible. I never pictured myself being in this situation ever. But here I am, just scraping by." Prime Minister, why are Australian families paying the price for Labor's economic incompetence?
Order. Order. The member for Moncrieff was heard in silence. The Prime Minister will give him the same courtesy. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Moncrieff for her question. And in her electorate, 88,000 taxpayers will get a tax cut. 88,000. And the member for Moncrieff dismisses that as saying that doesn't matter. They're saying it won't make a difference.
Order.
So I hope the member for Moncrieff writes to all of her constituents and says, all 88,000 of them, and says, the tax cut that you just got will make no difference whatsoever to you. I hope that the member for Moncrieff also says that the wage increase that the members' electorate, as part of the 2.6 million Australians on minimum or award wages who got a wage increase as well as a tax cut, I hope the member for Moncrieff says that that's irrelevant. That doesn't matter. You don't deserve it. Because we know that they voted against it and said that they'd roll it back. And before last Thursday, they said they were going to reimpose the tax cuts that were going to benefit the member for Moncrieff and myself and everyone in this chamber at the expense of hard-working people who are cleaners, aged care workers, people who are working in supermarkets. We're going to simply miss out, get nothing whatsoever. So I find it extraordinary that those opposite dismiss energy price relief, dismiss award wages going up, dismiss tax cuts going to every single taxpayer, dismiss cheaper childcare, dismiss all those people who've had the benefit of fee-free take, dismiss the $300 in energy bill relief, which in Queensland has added to the $1,000 in energy bill relief from the Queensland state government. That they say, oh, none of that matters. None of that matters. Those opposite would do absolutely nothing because they have no positive plans for anything, just 24-hour-a-day negativity.
The member for Fadden continually interjecting during that answer. He is now warned. Give the call to the member for Newcastle.
Here. Thank you, Speaker. My questions to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting Australian women with the cost of living?
Give the call to the Minister representing the Minister for Women.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Newcastle for the question. There are 78,000 taxpayers in her electorate that have benefited as of the 1st of July from Labor's tax cuts, including a substantial number of women in her electorate. We have deliberately placed women and gender equality at the centre of our economic plan. This hasn't happened by accident. We know that women work incredibly hard across our economy, and we do understand that people are under pressure and that some are doing it tough. It's why we are working to ensure that women earn more and then get to keep more of what they earn. And that has happened because of the policies of this government. Yesterday, we delivered a tax cut to every single taxpayer, and on average, women taxpayers will receive a tax cut of around $1,650, which is $707 more than they would have received under those opposite Stage 3 tax plans. Now, we deliberately made sure, when we were looking at the Stage 3 tax plans, we wanted to make sure that people who were under your plans getting absolutely a big fat zero when it came to tax cuts, who earned under $45,000, some of the lowest income earners in the country, talking about our changes to them.
Order. The Minister will pause. The Manager Opposition on point of order.
Mr Speaker, on relevance, the Minister has been comparing and contrasting for most of her answer. The question was actually commendably tight. How is the government supporting Australian women cost of living, with no reference to the record of other political parties?
Order. The Minister needs the Manager Opposition is correct. There was no compare or contrast. Just assisting the Minister's answer that she ensures that she complies with standing orders, to ensure she's explaining order to the House if she does compare and contrast the changes that have occurred as opposed to what had just happened in the past.
Thank you. I was getting to that. The changes that we made to the Stage 3 tax cuts that saw workers under $45,000 getting absolutely nothing, we have changed that to ensure that they do now get a tax cut, and they are predominantly women who work in childcare, in disability, aged care workers, nurses and teachers, highly feminised professions, making sure that they actually earn more and then get to keep more of what they earn. Yesterday, of course, we delivered our commitment to increase paid parental leave scheme to 22 weeks, a really important reform to paid parental leave. But we also are making sure that we're paying superannuation on paid parental leave, and that will have a huge impact on women's retirement incomes in the years ahead, something that I'm very proud of on this side of the House. We've also ensured that we have the award wages increase, 2.6 million Australians benefiting from wages increases. Again, some of the lowest paid workers in this country, predominantly women. And of course, we are also increasing superannuation overall, which again will also assist women to make sure that they've got retirement incomes. We are, of course, delivering energy bill relief, freezing the cost of PBS medicines, making sure bulk billing's going up so people can afford to see the doctor, and also getting a fairer deal for consumers at the supermarket checkout. Women's equality is a central driver of everything that we do on this side of the House, something of which I am very proud.
The call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, in the gallery today are representatives of the farmers, shearers, truckies and local communities whose livelihoods rely on the live sheep export industry that the Labor government is shutting down. Given Labor claims its phase-out of live sheep exports is due to animal welfare, can the Prime Minister name one country that has higher animal welfare standards for live exports than Australia?
Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I'm asked about the live sheep export industry, and I'm asked in the context of the legislation that was carried through the Senate last night. I met with farmers yesterday afternoon in my office, and I listened to what they had to say, and I respectfully, of course, indicated a preparedness to continue to work with them. They have an industry that's worth $80 million. The package that we have on the table is currently worth $107 million, greater than
Order. The member for
the annual industry. And the truth is that the live sheep industry has been in decline compared with the sheep meat industry that's valued around about $4 billion and has expanded substantially in places like the United Kingdom.
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The Treasurer and the Leader of the Opposition, quite happy for you to take the conversation outside to discuss the issue in detail. Order. The Prime Minister was asked a question. And I want to hear his answer, and I'm sure everyone in the House does.
Leader of the Nats might have just had a little nudge to his right, because the Deputy Leader of the Opposition had this to say. Live sheep exports fails on both economic and animal welfare grounds. Unfortunately, this is an industry with an operating model built on animal suffering. The industry has had countless second chances.
Yep. The member for Fremantle will cease interjecting. I want to hear the Leader of the Nationals on his point of order, which he's entitled to make.
On relevance, Mr Speaker, it was a very tight question around naming one country predicated on Labor's decision, not on the coalition's, but on Labor's decision to shut this industry down. Very tight question, asking for one country. He's been given nearly 2 minutes and he has not been relevant to the question. That was very tight.
Well, the issue with direct relevance, as we deal with this on most weeks in question time, is the Prime Minister wasn't talking about live sheep exports. If he wasn't talking about the government's decision, if he wasn't talking about the commentary around it, of course he wouldn't be directly relevant. And yes, I know you'd like a one-word answer, but as we have done many times, the standing order doesn't provide for that. There are options to provide that. No one's taken me up on the offer to ensure that could happen. So whilst the standing orders exist as they are, and the Prime Minister is being directly relevant to the topic, and I think he's quoting another member of Parliament regarding the issue, I'm left with another choice to make sure he remains on topic. But if he strays off the topic, and order, the Leader of the Nationals is warned. Prime Minister in continuation, and will be relevant to the question.
I reiterate that I met with these people not just yesterday, but I've met with them in Western Australia as well.
Yeah, that's right. The member for Forrest will cease interjecting.
The Deputy Leader had this to say. The industry has had countless second chances to improve conditions, but exporters do not comply with the rules because regulations written on paper in Australia cease to mean anything once the ship departs. She was asked last year the same position, and she said, we actually don't need this trade at all. Of course I stand by what I presented in this parliament. Senator Sarah Henderson said this.
Order.
If any person in Australia crams sheep into a transport vehicle for 25 days in the searing heat, she went on to say that person will be charged with animal cruelty. And of course there's the member for Latrobe, another key member of their front bench, who said if you had a dog in a car all day in hot conditions, the owners would be charged with animal cruelty, yet it is okay for 1,000 sheep to go into international waters, suffer heat stress, suffer lack of ventilation, suffer lack of water and die in cruel, inhumane conditions.
Order.
To me,
Prime
that is not acceptable. I suggest the member talk to...
Give the call to the member for Parramatta.
My question is to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. How is the Albanese Labor government helping the sustainability of the NDIS, including through cost of living support for NDIS workers, and are there any threats?
The call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
Congratulations to the 90,000 Parramatta taxpayers getting a tax cut. But there's also good news for the over 400,000 people, the therapists and the disability support workers who look after participants who will all be getting tax cuts, have just been getting them. A disability support worker on $75,000 is going to get about $1,500 in tax cuts this year. An occupational therapist on $120,000 will get about $2,700 tax cuts, so that's good news. Plus, award wages have moved for disability carers about 15% since Labor got elected. There's the $300 energy supplement, cheaper medicines, and super's going up to 11.5%. So literally, the NDIS workforce is getting to earn more and keep more of what they earn. But there is some threats to the cost of living pressures on the scheme and people working on it. There are vital NDIS reforms to get a better deal for participants stuck in the Senate until mid-August. This is bad news because the actuary of the scheme has said that an 8-week delay on this bill is going to add $1 billion in inflated costs to the NDIS. Now, the Senate has had 12 weeks to look at this matter. But puzzlingly, the coalition members of the Senate have got some more questions they need answered. Now, I explained last week that the personal budgets are getting overspent before the expiry of their plans, and that's a loophole we need to stop the automatic top-ups. But there's another change I'd like to let the House reflect upon. Currently, the Act only excludes supports that are supposed to be funded by other service systems, but it doesn't rule out specific services in the primary legislation. Courts have taken a very broad interpretation about what's allowed to be spent on NDIS money. They've been rolling successive governments on NDIS decisions. There's a new Section 10 which will exclude some of the specific decisions which shouldn't be being funded because they're not true to the purpose of the scheme. But remember I said the Liberals haven't made up their mind. I want to put to the House what is so difficult that will require 8 weeks and $1 billion. At the moment, we want to rule out the payment of strata fees, fines, steam rooms, gambling, legal cannabis, cruises, trips to Japan, non-assistance animals, taxidermy, weddings, gift cards, the Liberal favourite, sex toys, crystal therapy, cuddle therapy, clairvoyance and tarot.
Order. Order. No, order. Order. The member for Hasluck, the member for Lyons will cease ejecting. The Minister for the Environment. No. We're going to deal with this in a professional way. The Manager of Opposition. I want to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
It is unparliamentary and the Minister should withdraw.
Look, order. Order. Members on my right. I agree with the Manager of Opposition Business. I'm going to ask the Minister to withdraw so we can just continue.
OK, I'll withdraw. The other things, and some opposites will probably have to look it up, we want to ban somatic therapy, mastermind coaches, cryptocurrency. Quite frankly, The Leader of the Opposition
Order.
says who's the ugly. Why are you keeping these rorts on the scheme? It is all on the head of the coalition. You couldn't run the NDIS. We're fixing it.
Is the member for Deakin seeking a point of order?
Asking a question.
No. The member for Kennedy was on order. 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 The Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme will cease interjecting. The member for Kennedy has been waiting patiently for his question. He now has the call.
Minister for Northern Development. Minister, are you aware Red Ted Theodore's home, the Chillagoe Mineral Province, was birthplace of the Labor movement? Liberals chanted Red Ted better dead. With the advent of industrial-scale mining, Chillagoe, without port access, was choked into oblivion. West of Cairns are 6 of Australia's 8 biggest rivers. Doesn't this necessitate building the $1,000 million bridle track tunnel, thereby accessing the port and exploding North Queensland's current mineral, food, timber and industrial production to over $21,000 million a year?
There was a question somewhere in there. So, the Minister for Order, the Minister for Northern Australia, and the Minister for Resources has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for Kennedy for his fine question. He's a tireless advocate for his community, and I do acknowledge that North West Queensland, Chillagoe, and other places right across West Queensland have been very important and had a very important role in the Labor movement. I want to acknowledge the member for Kennedy and his compelling stand against the Coalition's unfair tax plans, as he has referenced the Labor movement. I will mention how important Labor's tax cuts are to his constituents in Kennedy. Over 71,000 taxpayers in your electorate, member for Kennedy, will receive a tax cut of over $1,400 each. The member is very importantly raised the matter of Cairns and the Cairns port and port access and the need for infrastructure in North and West Queensland. They are vital for the economy and for the development of the resources sector there. Indeed, I hosted the Northern Australia Ministerial Forum at HMAS Cairns in Cairns last October with the ministers from Queensland, the Northern Territory and Western Australia. In relation to the port itself, the Australian Government will contribute $150 million toward the $300 million expansion of the Cairns Marine Precinct, which is really important for the export industry that will come through the Northwest Mineral Province in his electorate. You mentioned, the member for Kennedy mentioned the proposed or the idea of the bridle track tunnel to the Cairns port. That is a very large undertaking and there's been much discussion about it. I'm more than happy to speak with the relevant minister, the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport in regard to this, but I will point out to the member for Kennedy, as you know, the Labor government is delivering on a $120 million commitment to the shared commitment with the Queensland Government of a $260 million upgrade to the Kuranda Range Road. And I know the Kuranda Range Road, member for Kennedy, is not the ideal solution for what you want to achieve in the Northwest Province. It is a difficult road and it does have its problems. And as the member for Kennedy knows, and as I know, there is a lot of geographical challenges getting items from his electorate to the Cairns port. But what is really important is that we do support the workers of North West Queensland. We do support those other incentives to increase mining activity in his electorate. Indeed, and I expect and I look forward to discussing with the member for Kennedy his support for the production tax credits worth $17 billion for critical minerals in his electorate as well as many others. Indeed, QEM's vanadium mine in Julia Creek in the member for Kennedy's electorate is one of the world's largest deposits of this critical mineral, and I'll be more than happy to brief him and his the very good people, hard-working people in his office in relation to that part of how we can incentivise the resources sector in his electorate in Kennedy.
Give the call to the member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on cost of living relief for our Australian Defence Force personnel, and how does this differ from other plans or policies?
Call to the Minister for Defence and the Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank the member for her question? As a result of the Albanese Labor government's tax plans, yesterday every member of the Australian Defence Force, every public servant in the Department of Defence received a tax cut, right across the board. From a civilian dog handler at RAF Base Amberley, who this financial year will receive a tax cut of $2,197, through to a Navy leading seaman medical assistant at Larrakia Barracks in Darwin, who will receive a tax cut of $2,047, or an Air Force vehicle mechanic at RAF Base Richmond, who will receive a tax cut of $1,463, and that tax cut is twice what that person would have received under the Stage 3 tax cuts of those opposite. And this is in addition to wage increases for the Defence Force of 8 to 9% since the Albanese government came to office, and they are the biggest wage increases that we've seen in the Defence Force in more than a decade. And when you combine that with what we've done to improve Defence Force housing, what we've done for Defence families to improve the family health benefit, what we've done to increase retention bonuses, all of this has meant that for those men and women who choose to wear our nation's uniform, more is being offered and more is being done. And that is actually making a real difference to the challenge of recruitment and retention, because separation rates are now falling and recruitment rates are starting to turn around. By literally valuing our Defence Force personnel more, we are making a thoughtful contribution to workforce planning. Now, 7 weeks ago, the Shadow Minister said that in 8 weeks' time, next week, he'll be releasing his own detailed workforce plan, and certainly we are all very much looking forward to that. But so far, his only idea has been to suggest that we take tens of thousands of public servants from who knows where, cut them and put them into uniform. That idea, he explicitly said, was on the table. And I wonder, has that idea worked anywhere in the world ever? While those opposite are busily barking at the moon, the Albanese Labor government is improving the lives of the men and women who wear our nation's uniform, because we know that it is their service which keeps Australians safe.
To call to the member for Deakin.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Analysis shows that due to Labor's migration policies, with nearly 1 million migrants in the last 2 years, one new home needs to be built every 2 minutes to accommodate the current immigration intake. Prime Minister, under your government, why has home ownership never been further out of reach?
For the Prime Minister, I couldn't hear that answer because of the continual interjection. For the Prime Minister, I want to hear the question. Order.
Thank you, Mr.
The
Speaker.
Treasurer will cease interjecting. I'm going to ask the member for Deakin. I couldn't hear the question. I've got to hear the question if people then want me to take action down the track. So, member for Deakin will reset the clock and he'll be given the opportunity to ask his question again.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Analysis shows that due to Labor's migration policies of nearly 1 million migrants in the last 2 years, one new home needs to be built every 2 minutes to accommodate your current immigration intake. Prime Minister, under your government, why has home ownership never been further out of reach for Australians?
Order. Give the call to order. The member for Deakin has asked his question and the Treasurer will cease interjecting. Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the member for Deakin for his question. I quite enjoyed being in his electorate on Saturday, and I look forward to returning, Mr Speaker, and knocking on the doors of homes in Deakin, homes that we want more of. That's why we have a plan to build 1.2 million homes. That's why we have a $32 billion Homes for Australia plan. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what sort of homes, because those are just against it. They combined with the Greens political party in the Senate to defer off support for the Housing Australia Future Fund, to build more social homes and affordable homes. Now, I'm not surprised by the Liberal Party acting in that way, but they did consistently, and eventually we were able to get that legislation through the Senate. And if you look at the applications that have come through, there has been enormous demand through that system. Then, of course, it comes to renters. Now, when it comes to the build-to-rent scheme, they combined last week again with, guess who? The Greens over there in what is...
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The member for Deakin on a point of order.
Look, the point of order is relevance. There's no way that the Prime Minister can be relevant to the question critiquing the opposition. A home needs to be built every 2 minutes, and home ownership is further out of reach.
Resume your seat. When you put a question before the House, is why is home ownership out of the reach for Australians, which was the question at the end. Yes, there were other factors in there. That's a fairly broad statement. Obviously, the Prime Minister doesn't agree with that statement, so he's going to outline. The remainder of his answer won't be about the opposition, because if it is, he won't complete his answer. But when there's a question around a broad statement, really, at the end, he's going to have a broad answer. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr. Speaker, I'm speaking about what our plans have been to build more homes. That's right. Build more homes. That's right. Now, the build-to-rent tax incentives that were passed in the House of Representatives and blocked in the Senate last week. So you're against more social homes, you're against more private rentals, and the argument for voting against build-to-rent, Mr. Speaker, was that developers would build the homes. That was the argument that the Greens political party put out. Surprise, surprise, Mr. Speaker, developers build homes. That's the way that it works. And that's what the build-to-rent scheme was about.
Order.
They, of course, also opposed our rental scheme. But just so you don't think, Mr. Speaker, it's just about less social homes, it's about less private rentals, it's also against more home ownership, because we have our Help to Buy scheme over there in the Senate again, a shared equity scheme, that has been implemented in the past by previous coalition government, introduced in various places and supported them, particularly in Western Australia, but they're opposed to that as well. So they support homes, except for public housing, except for private housing and home ownership, and except for private rentals. Apart from that, they're all for it.
Order. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, just reminding the House we've got the Minister for Climate Change, the Member for Fisher, the Member for Fadden, the Member for Barker and the Leader of the Nationals, all on warnings. Give a call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Minister, how is the Albanese Labor government helping to reduce overcrowding in housing, create more real jobs with proper wages and decent conditions in remote communities, including in the Northern Territory?
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
I thank the member for Lingiari for her question. Lingiari is most of the Northern Territory, covering many remote communities, and I can tell you the poverty there is grinding. The first stage of our remote jobs and economic development program will create 3,000 new jobs, real wages, proper conditions and the sorts of things that we all expect that comes with a job. in sectors like community services or healthcare, hospitality, tourism and horticulture, which will help with the cost of living in remote communities where people are doing it so tough. I was in Kununurra 2 weeks ago and met Connie and her mother, who are both part of the New Jobs Trial. They are working at the Lily Lagoon Resort, and they told me what having a job means to their lives, what it means for their families and what it means for their communities. It is making a difference to their skills. It is making a difference to the way in which they can look to the future. Because jobs in remote communities are about so much more than a pay slip. They help to break the cycle of intergenerational disadvantage, build stronger communities and create opportunities for the future. Decent housing and employment are fundamental to closing the gap. Many Indigenous Australians in the Northern Territory live in overcrowded conditions. I think most people are aware of that. This drives poor health, educational outcomes and economic and social outcomes. In March, the Prime Minister and I visited Pinjarra in the Northern Territory and announced a $4 billion agreement with the Northern Territory government to build 2,700 homes over the next 10 years. It will halve overcrowding. 2 weeks ago on the Tiwi Islands, I signed a partnership agreement to deliver these houses with the Northern Territory Government, Aboriginal Housing Northern Territory and the land councils in the Territory. It demonstrates a new way of doing business with Aboriginal communities. Houses will be built that are culturally appropriate and meet the climatic needs of those parts of the world. This has meant a 200% increase in the Albanese government's investment ever in Aboriginal housing. Last financial year alone, we delivered 250 houses. These measures are changing lives.
Give the call to the member for Calare.
To the Prime Minister. It was recently announced that emergency responders, volunteers and community workers involved in the February-March 2022 floods in northern New South Wales and Queensland may now rightly be eligible for the National Emergency Medal. The central western New South Wales floods of November 2022 saw extraordinary acts of courage and service across our communities, including the biggest helicopter rescue in Australia's history at Eugowra. Will you support the National Emergency Medal being extended to those who served with such distinction in that emergency?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Calare for his question. I have visited Eugowra with the member for Calare on 2 occasions, as well as visiting other areas that were affected in the member for Riverina's electorate as well. I'm aware of the issue, and the Minister representing Minister Watt will respond to the question.
Call to the Minister representing the Minister for Emergency Management.
Thank you, Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Calare for his question. And can I just say, on behalf of the government, how much we respect the manner in which he engages with us from the crossbench, and I understand the spirit in which this question's asked. We're all aware of the ways in which your community was affected by this terrible series of natural disasters, in particular Eugowra, as the Prime Minister has mentioned there. One of the things we see right across this chamber is that it's sometimes at those worst moments for our country where we see the very best of the Australian spirit, and I know across your community, member, you saw acts of bravery and heroism that you think are appropriate to be acknowledged. Let me just say a few quick words about the government's overall response to this, and then I'll get to the direct question about the medal that the member has raised. As the Prime Minister's noted, he was there in the community in March talking to your constituents about how this has affected your local area. The Albanese government has delivered a range of different funding supports to support the Central West in the recovery from this very significant event. Late last year, the government announced a cost-sharing agreement for $100 million, a package which included $60 million to assist in mitigation measures and up to $40 million cost-sharing for a housing program to support people who were displaced by this event. In relation to the National Emergency Medal, There is a National Emergency Medal Committee which actually manages this process on behalf of the Commonwealth Government. It's not a decision for ministers about who is able to access this. There's quite a lengthy criteria that the National Emergency Medal Committee looks at, which includes the scale and community impact of a disaster. It looks at things like how many casualties were resulted, how much critical infrastructure was destroyed in the disaster. And so I believe they've made an initial decision which does not account for people in the members' electorate. And I'd say from their perspective, this doesn't diminish any of those efforts that were gone to. At the request of the member, the Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister has actually taken a very unusual step of writing to the committee and asking them to give a reconsideration of the matters that the members has raised there. I can see why he's raised this matter. I can understand him representing his constituents in that way. We will be very pleased to liaise with the committee and come back to the member when we have a response, and I'm sure at any time to the local member and anyone who is experiencing natural disaster in this House, the Emergency Management Minister or myself are always available to meet and talk further about these matters.
The call to the member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. How has the Albanese Labor government's delivery of the National Anti-Corruption Commission helped to improve integrity in government after a decade of inaction?
Good question. Call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I do thank the member for Higgins for her question, and I congratulate the 85,000 taxpayers in her electorate of Higgins who will benefit from the Albanese government's tax cuts. At the last election, the Australian Labor Party listened. We listened to the Australian people who told us that they wanted to restore truth, integrity, honesty and accountability to government. We promised we'd deliver a National Anti-Corruption Commission without delay, and we did. It is 1 year since the establishment of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. The Commission's tasked with detecting, investigating and preventing corruption across the Commonwealth public sector. We said it would have a broad jurisdiction, and it does. We said it would be able to receive referrals from anyone, and it can. We said it would have strong statutory oversight, and it does. We said it would have retrospective powers, and it does. We said it would have the power to hold public hearings to make findings of fact and operate with robust procedural fairness, and it does. And most importantly, we said it would be independent of government, and it is. Only the Commission can decide what it investigates. Designing the Commission this way was a deliberate choice. It is the best way of ensuring that the Commission maintains its independence. And of course, the independence of this Commission is critical to its success. In its first 12 months, the Commission has received 3,154 referrals. It's conducting 26 corruption investigations and overseeing or monitoring a further 21 investigations by other agencies. Those opposite, of course, also committed to establishing an Integrity Commission. The former Prime Minister Scott Morrison stood up with the former Attorney-General Christian Porter at the end of 2018 and promised a National Anti-Corruption Commission, and they broke their promise. You can't trust those on the other side to mean what they say. You can't trust those on the other side to deliver on what matters to Australians, and you can't trust their priorities. This side of the House is focused on what matters. Yesterday, tax cuts were delivered for every Australian taxpayer. A $300 discount on energy bills was delivered for every Australian household. That's how you deliver cost of living relief, not by pushing up power prices with nuclear reactors. We have our priorities right, we listen to Australians and we deliver on our commitments.
The call to the member for Wannon.
Thanks, Speaker. And my question is to the Prime Minister. Does the Prime Minister agree that his decision to increase migration by a record 547,000 migrants in 2023 has contributed to Labor's homegrown housing crisis?
Give the call to the order. The Minister for Housing and Homelessness will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
What I agree with is that we inherited a system that was broken. It was their system that we inherited, and that's why 3 inquiries have indicated that broken system needs repair, and that's precisely what my government is doing.
Give the call. Order. The member for Wright is warned. Give the call to the Chief Government Whip.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Can the Treasurer outline the steps the government is taking to improve competition? What other options have been proposed?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Speaker. I thank the member for Lawler for her question, but also on behalf of the 95,000 taxpayers in her local community who will be getting a tax cut because of her efforts and the efforts of this Albanese Labor government. Now, this government is taking action on a number of fronts to make our economy more competitive, and here I shout out the Assistant Minister for Competition for the work that we do to that end. We're strengthening the Food and Grocery Code of Conduct to make it mandatory to get a fair go for farmers and families. We've commissioned the Consumer Group Choice and funded them so that people can find and follow cheaper prices at the checkout. We're strengthening our merger approval system. We've increased the penalties for anti-competitive conduct, and we've banned unfair contract terms as well, and we've empowered the ACCC when it comes to supermarket prices, because we want to make our supermarkets as competitive as they can be so that people can get the best prices possible. Now, the opposition today, Mr Speaker, made another chaotic announcement. There's always 2 common features when those opposite make an announcement. Step 1, roll the Shadow Treasurer, tick. And step 2, not be able to answer the most basic question about the most basic details of the policy. We saw the Shadow Treasurer rolled on nuclear and public subsidies. We saw him rolled on tax cuts just last week, and we've seen him rolled again today when it comes to divestiture powers in the supermarket sector. But in fairness to the Shadow Treasurer, he's not the only one rolled today. Shadow Minister Hume, Senator Hume, said on Peter Stefanovic's show not that long ago, there's always concern with divestiture powers whether they will actually decrease prices. That's from the Shadow Minister for Finance, Mr Speaker. Now, this is the usual half-baked announcement that's been rushed out to try and cover up for the last half-baked announcement, which was the nuclear reactors that they don't have a cost for, Mr Speaker. And once again, we're seeing that once again here today. Now, if those opposite really asked about supermarkets, really cared about supermarkets or competition or inflation, they would have asked us about it today. The announcement was only made just before question time, and they couldn't even get around to asking about it, Mr Speaker, and that's because they are hopelessly divided on this question. The Shadow Treasurer has been rolled. The Shadow Finance Minister has been rolled. The Leader of the National Party has got his way over the wishes of so many others on that front bench, Mr Speaker. Now, obviously, the Food and Grocery Code, when it looked at this matter, said that the risk was that it could actually make things worse, not better. It found that forced divestiture resulted in a supermarket selling some of its stores to another large incumbent, or enforced closure of stores. We might see less competition, not more competition. And because of that, the Food and Grocery Code review didn't see it as a credible threat. Previous competition reviews, all the way back to 1993 and 2015, didn't recommend it, because this is the usual half-baked idea to cover up for the last half-baked idea.
Call to the member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Prime Minister. A new UBS report has forecast power prices will soar by up to 50% by 2029 as Labor's renewables rollout stalls, forcing state Labor governments to extend the life of coal-fired power stations to keep the lights on. Prime Minister, why are Australian families paying the price for Labor's economic incompetence?
Order. The Minister for the Environment is warned. Order. The Minister for Housing is warned. To interject before a Minister or Prime Minister answers a question is highly disorderly. It applies to both sides of the chamber. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The question goes to energy security and the impact that a lack of energy security will have, because we have to deal with supply. And indeed, when they were—
Order. The member for Fairfax has asked his question. He's now warned, so no more interjections for the rest of question time. Prime Minister has the call.
On their watch, 24 of the nation's ageing coal-fired power stations announced they were closing. 24 out of 28. 8 had shut by the time we came to office. 8. And of course, those closures included Liddell, but they included Redbank in Queensland, Wallerawang in Queensland, Anglesea, Northern Power, Playford, Morwell, Hazelwood. All of this happened, and those opposite just had their little internal debates. We had the NEG, we had various schemes, 22 different schemes announced, and nothing happened. Nothing was actually adopted, which is why Andrew McKellar from Mackie has said past failure has crimped certainty for industry and investors and left our energy sector in disarray. Australian businesses and households are now paying the price. And now what they say is that they will wind back, oppose our Rewiring the Nation plan, our capacity investment scheme, our safeguard mechanism, even though they're the ones who came up with it, the deployment of community batteries, the energy efficiency upgrades, the small business energy incentive, all the work that we're doing to provide business with certainty. And that's why the Business Council of Australia, the Australian Industry Group, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry stood with the Australian Conservation Foundation as well as workers' representatives in the ACTU and supported this plan going forward. Now what they say is stop all that, do nothing until the 2040s, and we've got a plan. We won't tell you how much it'll cost. We will tell you that taxpayers will pay for it. We won't tell you how many reactors there'll be. We won't tell you how many gigs will be generated as a result. We won't tell you any of the detail of how we get around planning. We, on the one hand, will impose these on communities. On the other hand, they'll listen to them. We won't tell you what will happen when those sites are rejected. It's not a plan. It's just a thought bubble to once again delay investment and to make it more difficult. And the only thing that can happen under their plan is an escalation of power prices, which is what every expert in the energy sector knows will happen.
Give the call to the member for Paterson.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How are the Albanese Labor government's same job, same pay reforms helping people in the mining industry earn more and keep more of what they earn? And what has been the response, Minister?
Give the call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Speaker. And I thank the member for Paterson, representing 75,000 people who've now got the tax cut come through for them, making sure that people earn more and keep more of what they earn, but also together between the member for Paterson and the member for Hunter, arguing more than anyone else in this place to make sure that we close the labour hire loophole so that people doing the same work would receive the same pay. And the mining union's been making a number of applications to the Fair Work Commission, and yesterday we got the first decision from the Fair Work Commission, and it goes to mine workers at the Callide coal mine in Queensland. Now, reportedly at Callide, reportedly for those workers, the difference in pay between labour hire and directly employed was $10,000 to $20,000 difference a year. $10,000 to $20,000 difference. Now, these were work, and only 40% were employed directly. The rest were employed by WorkPac. Now, these were workers who attended the same meetings but were paid less, who operate the same machines but were paid less, who wear the same uniform to work but were paid less, who follow instructions from the same managers but were paid less, who use the exact same roster but were paid less, who are in the same production crews but were paid less, who share the same crib facilities but were paid less, who undertake the same training but were paid less, who did the same job but were not given the same pay. and I can announce to the House what was decided by the Fair Work Commission yesterday is these workers from the 1st of November who are doing the same job will get the same pay. Yeah. This is something that was fought for by members on this side and opposed by every single member opposite. And the summary of what that means in terms of cost of living, because when you talk about cost of living, one of the critical things is what's the money that's going into your bank account to start with. And for these workers, more money is going into their bank account because of the pay rises. More money is going into their bank account because of the tax cuts. And one of those workers, Josh, said this: the pay rise will have a very strong impact, particularly since I've just started a family. I now have a daughter who's just 2 months old, and this pay rise will help go towards the essential things like housing, grocery, bills, nappies and baby clothes. Every one of those workers, as the extra money goes into their bank accounts, knows that those opposite want people to work longer for less, and those on this side want to make sure that they earn more and keep more of what they earn.
Call to the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.